Back when I lived in the rural Midwest, about 10 years ago, I lived in a house right off of the highway. My house was right between one town and another, almost right on the county line. Our house had a big circular driveway. If you drove in the driveway, you would be heading straight toward our barn. If you turned right, you could pull into our garage. If you went past the garage, you could circle around in front of the house and pull back out to where you started. Our house had two large double doors in the front, which we rarely used. We always used the door that was inside the garage. One night it was very late and my doorbell rang. My husband, my 3-year-old daughter, and I were all asleep. It woke me up and I thought maybe I was dreaming. It rang again. I woke my husband up. He thought I was hearing things until it rang again. It was very dark outside, but we have a dusk to dawn light, so most of the driveway is pretty well lit. Unfortunately, you can't really see the front doors unless you open the door and look out. You can open just one at a time, or you can open them both by using two latches that are in the top and the bottom of one of the doors. My husband gets up and I follow him. He decides he's going to open the door. I want to call the cops, but because we live on the county line, we know it's going to be a while before they can get there. He opens the door to a girl, maybe in her early 20s. She looks normal except for the fact that she's standing at my door in the middle of the night. I look past her, and her car is pulled into my driveway just off of the road, not up to the house, not around the circle. She says she needs to use the phone. She says her car battery died or something, she's not sure, but she can't get it to start. I told my husband no way. This is how horror movies start. We offered to call the cops. She asks over and over, but I am not letting her in. We tell her we will call and she kind of stomps off. We watch her walk back to the car, maybe 50 feet away. I can see her car. I can see her. I call the cops. They say they will be there as soon as they can, about 15 minutes. They don't sound very concerned, and at this point, I'm not really either. I mean, it's just a girl. She probably does have a dead battery. She opens the trunk. No lights come on. She rummages around in the trunk. Then the driver's side door opens and out steps a guy. Then the back passenger door opens. Out steps one more guy. They all rummage around the trunk. No lights on. I can't hear anything. I can't hear them talking, and I can't tell what they are doing. They all get back in the car. Now, at this point, maybe 5 minutes have gone by, and I'm silently praying that the sheriff puts his foot on the gas and gets here quick. I know it's going to be another 10 minutes or so. They just sit there in the car, lights off, not moving. I can't see them when they are in the car, but I know they are in there. I know they didn't get out of the car and walk past the house because they would have had to walk right under the dusk to dawn light. I would have seen them. Then I see something. Someone. Walking toward the car from the right, coming from the direction of the barn. It's a man. I have no idea who this man is. We don't have a neighbor for at least a mile, and he's coming from the back of my property, which ends in a creek. He walks under the dusk to dawn light straight to the car. He doesn't look at the house, he just walks to the car and gets in the back. The car starts up and they slowly back out of my driveway and head north. The cops arrive about 10 minutes later, and at this point I am freaking out. They search around but can't find anything. They ask us if we got a license plate, but they were parked too far away. They tell us to call if they come back. My husband goes and gets his shotgun from the shop, located on our property, and we try to go back to sleep. They never came back. I don't know who those people were, and I don't know what they wanted. I've never spoken about this, not even to my parents or anyone around me. I am a 22-year-old male, and this happened when I was 14 through the age of 15. My friends and I would always hang out at the local mall during our free time. One day, I had arrived earlier than my friends and was waiting at a seating area in the food court. There were a couple of couches around each other, and it was a common area for anyone to come sit. So I didn't really notice when a man came over and sat at a couch across from me. I was sitting on my phone, not paying attention until he spoke up and said something along the lines of, "Do you come here often?" I looked up to see a man who was in his late 50s to 60s. I told him I often did with my friends, and he then introduced himself. I still remember his first name as it was the same as my dad's. I did not get an initial weird feeling. He looked normal enough and I would have no reason to be initially weirded out by someone. So I told him my name, and we started making small talk. I am a sociable person and have been since a young age, so I was fine talking with what I assumed was just an older man wanting to talk to someone. He started asking me things I liked to do. I said I enjoyed going out to the local lake and fishing and swimming, to which he said he went out to the same lake every weekend and enjoyed fishing and swimming as well. I said I enjoyed making music, and he said he liked making music also. I told him I was an avid piano player, and he excitedly told me he had a piano at his house. There were a few other things I mentioned, and to everyone, he said he enjoyed doing them also. It all felt normal right at first, but as we talked, I kept getting a weirder and weirder feeling. It was almost like with everything he said, he was trying to prove something and win me over. He said he had a boat at the lake and that we should go sometime. He even said that he lived right across the street from the mall, and that I was welcome to stop by and play the piano, even going as far as telling me the complex he lived in and how to get there from the mall. He even said if I'd like, I could go over that same day and play his piano. With every passing minute, it felt like he was trying harder and harder to get me to hang out with him. Talking with him honestly gave me the weirdest primitive instinct feeling ever, like I was in the face of evil or bad intentions. After 5 or 10 minutes of talking with him, I lied and said my friends had arrived and that I was going to go find them. He somewhat sadly said, "Okay," and wished me well. A couple of weeks went by and my friends and I went to the mall once again. We were all walking through the mall when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the same man in a hoodie walking past us in the opposite direction. We locked eyes for a split second, and my heart immediately dropped. I didn't look back, and I honestly forgot about it not soon after. But for the next 2 or so months, I kept seeing him randomly at the mall. I kept brushing it off as a coincidence, as there are definitely regulars at the mall who come often. So I really did not think too much of seeing him, as he never spoke to me since the first day. I would just occasionally see him, and he'd be looking at me. I was naive and had a semi-weird feeling any time I saw him, but just brushed it off. Until one day, I went to the mall with my friends. We hung out for a few hours before all leaving and going home our separate ways. I got home and went into my room. No one else was home, and I was by myself for a couple of hours. My mom got home around 8 p.m. and came into my room looking somewhat worried, asking if I noticed a guy outside. I said no. She then showed me her phone. We have 2 cameras, one in the front of the house and one in the back. About 20 minutes after I got home, someone approached our house. We lived off a very busy street, and our front wall blocks a majority of the view to the street, so we did not see a car park or anything, just a man walking up to our house. The camera was located near our front door looking out to the driveway, so as he got closer, I realized it was the same man who I had always seen at the mall. I immediately felt sick to my stomach. He came and looked through the front door glass. He walked over to the side of our house near our driveway and left the view of the camera. I remember there was nothing on the back camera, so he had to have stayed by the side of our house for a bit. My room was not located over there, so I have no idea what he could have been doing. He then came back around and looked through the front door again before walking away. I don't know if I was just too embarrassed or scared to say anything, but I said I did not notice and didn't know who that was. My mom found it weird that he was looking in our house, but said it could have been a homeless person or a druggie because we live off a busy street with a bus stop right in front of our house, so we just went with that. My dad added more security cameras after this to deter people, and I never admitted to seeing him before. But after he showed up at my house, it was confirmed to me he was following me around, and I don't know what his intentions were. He never came back to the house. We moved to a different part of the city not too long after, and I was too far to go to that mall again. I have not seen him since and wish to never again. This happened to me when I was 17 years old. I was just about to graduate high school. I was homeschooled and very encouraged to pursue entrepreneurship. I was trying to establish a photography business that I could run after graduating. In order to build my portfolio, I decided to ask a few friends and acquaintances to model for me. I asked a girl I worked with if she and her husband would like to model a couple's session for me. It would be a win-win since they would receive free photos, and I would get to add them to my website as sample work. We planned a day to meet, and I asked them to meet me at a local park one evening. Something you should know about this park is that it is pretty far out in the country. The park has soccer fields, baseball fields, a golf course, and walking trails, so it is on a large plot of land and fairly secluded. The only house in view of the park is the caretaker's home directly across the street from the entrance. Unless there is an event or a weekend, there are usually not many people there. I felt pretty confident meeting the couple there because I was only planning to arrive about 15 minutes early to set up, so I wouldn't be alone for long. The park has an entrance where you can drive down a road into the parking lot to get to all the sports fields, playground, and down to the pond. The front of the park has a large grassy strip, which is where I was planning to set up for my photos. I bypassed the entrance and pulled into a little dirt section at the front of the park and began unloading all of my props. I was always taught to be a cautious person, especially as a young woman, so I took a quick glance to see if anyone was at the park. I saw one car in the parking lot and two guys tossing a ball in the baseball field, along with their pit bull. Across the street, I could see the caretaker out in her yard, so that made me feel a lot better. I decided I would just keep an eye out and continued setting up my things. I would glance up every now and then to make sure that the two men were still on the baseball field. I had no reason to believe they would bother me, but something in my gut just told me to keep watch. The couple I was waiting on seemed to be running late. I finished my setup and glanced up to check on the two guys. To my horror, they were gone. The car was still there, but the men and the dog were nowhere in sight. There was a bit of a hill in front of me that blocked some of the park entrance from sight, so I thought maybe they had just decided to walk one of the nature trails. But again, that feeling in my gut just told me something was wrong. I looked at the caretaker's house and she had gone back inside. I couldn't get everything back to the car quickly, so I just grabbed my camera equipment and hopped in my car. I locked the doors, turned on the ignition, and got my phone out. Literally, as soon as I got settled in my car, I saw the two guys coming over the hill with their dog. I felt my gut feeling melt into panic. You have to understand, there was no reason for them to come up to where I was. It's literally just an open grassy yard. If the dog needed to relieve itself, there was plenty of place for that at the wood's edge, or the nature trail, or the walk to the pond, all of which were way closer to them than where I was. They walked around my setup, and when they got to my car, one guy went around the front, and the one holding the dog on the leash circled my car. I assumed that they realized I had already noticed they were coming, and that I was no longer vulnerable because they rejoined and walked further down, up and around through the soccer field. Once I felt like I was no longer in danger, I glanced down at my phone to see that the couple I was supposed to meet had apparently forgotten about it and were at the beach. I was so fed up at that point, I jumped out of the car, grabbed all my props, and shoved them into the car. This was my first experience of how scary it can be to be a female out alone. I've had multiple experiences since, but this one sticks out to me the most because I am absolutely certain that those guys intended to do me harm. And what kind of match would a 17-year-old girl be against two grown men and a pit bull? One thing is for certain, I will never go back to that park alone. This story comes from Belgium and took place in 2020 during COVID-19 confinements. I was 20 back then. At the time, because of the severity of the pandemic in Belgium, the law stated that you could only go out to practice sports or to work. So I took the habit of meeting with a friend, Sully, to go out for runs and to practice all kinds of sports in general. Both of us were quite fond of urban exploration and knew a spot in the outskirts of Brussels, consisting of an old sports and wellness center, where we took the habit to hang out after our runs. To get into the spot, you must go through a hole in a fence on a street, cross a small portion of woods, and you'll come up on a football pitch and tennis courts. Up on a hill is the center, which is an old 4-story building. The whole center takes up a whole street block. On that day, we had just finished a 5-kilometer run and went to our spot as usual. We were walking to the building since it was about to rain when we saw 2 teenagers sitting on the roof edge, and I remember thinking that it bothered me since we were planning to go to the roof as well. So we went to the hall area to wait for a bit in hopes that the people would leave. In the hall area, you have a clear view into the kitchen, which you must go through if you want to go to the roof. You can also see into another smaller hall and into the dining room. Sully was rolling himself a cigarette while I was gathering 2 chairs and an office table for us to sit. This next part gives me chills to this day. As I finished setting everything up, I remember starting to feel unwell, as if I were being watched, and not in a good way. That's when I looked at the kitchen and saw, for a brief moment, a head sticking out of the doorframe and staring right at us. It was a man. I couldn't say what age he was since he was all dirty, but the one thing I remember is that he had an exaggerated happy expression on his face, like he had just found exactly what he was looking for. At that moment, I just froze and was unable to react bravely to the situation. I leaned slowly towards Sully, all while keeping eye contact with the man, and told him very calmly that we had to go immediately. I tend to make lots of jokes to all of my friends and especially to Sully, but when he saw the look I had on my face when I told him we had to leave, he didn't say a word, just took his backpack and stood up. We ran to the football pitch and saw that the 2 teenagers were still on the roof, so we started to yell at them, asking if the man was with them or if they saw him. They answered that no, they hadn't seen anyone and had come by themselves, so if someone was there, he wasn't with them. We told them it was probably better for them to leave as well since we didn't know what the man in the lobby was up to. They told us they would be fine and would leave a bit later. We decided to leave since we had already told them what we saw, and we also had already been out for very long, so it wasn't very legal with confinement rules. As we were walking towards the woods, I turned back, and I could swear I saw a silhouette standing in front of the staircase leading to the roof, but my mind didn't quite react, and I just left alongside with my friend. I was so shocked, because nothing like it had happened to me before, that I just decided not to talk about it to anyone in fear of them not believing me or possibly making fun of me. My friend Sully is the only one who was there. He didn't take a look at the man, but he is as scared as me just by seeing my own reaction at the time. I don't know what happened to these teenagers. I found local articles and papers dating to that time about teenagers being chased by a crazy man in an abandoned building, but the information given wasn't enough for me to be sure it was the same people and the same story.